It sounded like a bomb. That is the only way the passengers on Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 could describe it. 1 second, you are climbing out of Portland, sipping a drink, scrolling through your phone. The next second, the laws of thermodynamics take over. A deafening, explosive decompression. The air in your lungs is ripped out instantly. The shirt is torn off the back of a teenager, and where there used to be a wall next to seat 26A, there is now just the sky. A gaping, door-sized hole looking down at the Oregon suburbs from 16,000 feet. Miraculously, no one died that night in January 2024. Physics was kind. Gravity was merciful. But while the passengers survived, the reputation of the most important industrial company in American history did not. Because this wasn't an accident. An accident is when lightning strikes or a bird hits an engine. This was a decision. This was the inevitable mathematical result of a 20-year experiment to see what happens when you let accountants run an engineering firm. But the hole in the side of that 737 MAX wasn't even the darkest part of this story. The darkest part happened 2 months later, in a pickup truck in Charleston, South Carolina. John Barnett, a man who had spent 3 decades keeping Boeing planes safe, a man who was midway through testifying about the rot inside the company, was found dead with a gunshot wound to the head. And he wouldn't be the last whistleblower to die this year. Today, we are not just talking about missing bolts or loose door plugs. Those are just symptoms. We are investigating a corporate murder mystery. We are going to look at how a company that once defined American excellence, the company that built the B-52, the 747, and the Saturn V rocket, was hijacked by a financial ideology that views safety as a cost center and engineering as a nuisance. We're going to trace the money. We will show you the exact financial mechanisms, stock buybacks, asset-light strategies, and executive compensation packages that incentivized managers to dismantle their own quality control systems. We will explain why Wall Street applauded as Boeing stripped the copper wiring out of its own walls. By the end of this video, you will understand that the 737 MAX disasters and the whistleblower deaths aren't anomalies. They are the system working exactly as it was designed. The question isn't, what went wrong with Boeing? The question is, why are we surprised when a company stops building planes to build stock prices instead? And more importantly, who is next? To understand the fall, you have to understand the height from which they fell. Go back to Seattle in the 1980s. Boeing wasn't just a company, it was a religion of competence. The internal culture was dominated by what they called the nerves of aluminium. The CEO was an engineer. The heads of divisions were engineers. The people who cleaned the floors probably knew more about aerodynamics than the current board of directors. In this era, finance department employees were treated like second-class citizens. They were necessary evils, kept in the basement to pay the light bills. If a chief engineer said a landing gear strut needed to be 10% stronger, he didn't have to show a PowerPoint about return on investment. He just did it. The motto was simple: eat the cost, save the pilot. This culture produced the 747, the queen of the skies. It was a massive financial gamble that almost bankrupted the company. But they built it anyway because they knew it would change the world. And it did. Airlines bought Boeing because they knew that, deep down, in the parts of the plane passengers never see, the engineers had overbuilt everything. They sold trust wrapped in aluminium. Let's pause to explain the financial concept that ruled old Boeing. It's called the margin of safety, but not in the way value investors use it. In engineering, if a wing needs to hold 10,000 pounds of pressure, you design it to hold 15,000. That extra 5,000 is pure waste from an accountant's perspective. It's extra metal, extra fuel burn, extra cost. It generates zero revenue on 99.9% of flights. But that waste is what keeps you alive in a storm over the Pacific. Old Boeing was structurally designed to prioritize this waste over efficiency. Their business model was long-term. They accepted lower profit margins in the short term to build a reputation that was bulletproof. It was a moat built on reliability. However, in the eyes of 1990s Wall Street, this was inefficient. Why spend money making a plane last 40 years if you can make it last 20 and sell them a new one sooner? Why have 100 quality inspectors when 50 could probably catch most of the errors? This tension between the redundancy required for physics and the leanness required for finance is where the crack began. Before we watch the hostile takeover that destroyed this culture, a quick reality check. Most people look at the stock market and see a graph of value. We look at it and see a graph of incentives. If you want to understand how a blue-chip company turns into a gambling addict, you need to understand the mechanics behind the curtain. That is what we do here at Capital Curriculum. We decode the financial incentives that shape your reality. If you want to be part of the few who actually understand how the machine works, make sure you are subscribed. Now, let's meet the man who killed Boeing. 1997, the turning point. Boeing acquires its rival, McDonnell Douglas. On paper, Boeing was the buyer. They had the cash, the better planes, and the market dominance. McDonnell Douglas was failing, struggling with a bad safety record and poor products. Logic dictates that the winner imposes their culture on the loser. But in one of the most bizarre twists in corporate history, the opposite happened. It was a reverse cultural takeover. The executives from the failing company, McDonnell Douglas, maneuvered their way into the top power positions of the new Boeing. Led by Harry Stonecipher, a man who famously said, "I need to change the culture of Boeing. We are going to run it like a business," they initiated a coup. Stonecipher looked at Boeing's engineers with disdain. He saw them as arrogant academics who didn't care about the stock price. He brought with him the McDonnell Douglas playbook: cut costs, squeeze suppliers, and focus obsessively on quarterly earnings per share. The headquarters was moved from Seattle, where the planes were built, to Chicago, a neutral city filled with bankers, specifically to physically separate the management from the engineers. The message was clear: the adults are talking in Chicago. You grease monkeys in Seattle, just do what you're told. Here is the weapon Stonecipher used to kill the engineering culture. It's a metric called Economic Value Added, or EVA. It sounds boring, but it's deadly. In simple terms, EVA punishes a company for owning assets. If you own a massive factory with expensive wind tunnels and thousands of skilled workers, that is capital employed. To a financier, capital employed is bad because it drags down your return on investment ratios. The goal of EVA is to make money without spending money. How? You stop designing new planes, which costs billions in R&D. You stop upgrading your factories. Instead, you squeeze the existing assets for every penny. This led to the strategy of derivative aircraft. Instead of building a clean sheet plane to replace the 737, the accountants said, just stretch the old one, put new engines on the old frame. Why? Because designing a new airframe takes 10 years and $15 billion. Patching an old one takes 4 years and $2 billion. The accountants looked at the spreadsheet and saw a no-brainer. Huge savings, faster time to market, higher stock price. The engineers looked at the same spreadsheet and saw a Frankenstein monster that would be aerodynamically unstable. But the engineers were no longer in charge. The change wasn't subtle, it was a purge. Stan Sauscher, a long-time Boeing physicist, recalls the shift vividly. He tried to raise a safety concern about a production issue, something that in the old days would have triggered an immediate stop work order. The new management's response? Is this going to delay delivery? Employees started joking that Boeing was now a hedge fund that just happened to own a few hangars. But it wasn't a joke. Managers were now compensated in stock options. If the stock went up, they got rich. If they delayed a delivery to fix a bolt, the stock went down and they lost their bonus. This incentive structure weaponized peer pressure. If you were the quality manager who flagged a defect, you weren't just doing your job. You were effectively stealing money from your boss's pocket. You were the enemy. The pizza parties began, celebrations for teams that reported 0 defects. But in a complex manufacturing environment, 0 defects is impossible. It's a lie. So they weren't celebrating quality, they were celebrating the suppression of truth. The ultimate manifestation of this financial mindset was the 787 Dreamliner project. To boost that return on net assets metric, executives decided to outsource not just the parts, but the engineering itself. They sent the design of the wings to Japan, the fuselage to Italy, the landing gear to France. They thought they could just assemble the pieces like a giant Lego set in Seattle. It was a disaster. The parts didn't fit, the wiring didn't match, the delays cost billions. But instead of learning from this, they doubled down. They spun off their own Wichita fabrication plant into a separate company called Spirit Aerosystems. Pay attention to this name, Spirit Aerosystems. This is crucial. Boeing sold its own factory to private equity investors to get the workers off their payroll. Then, they squeezed Spirit to cut costs. Spirit, now a separate company struggling to make a profit, cut corners, fired experienced staff, and rushed production. And guess who builds the fuselage where the door plug blew out? Spirit Aerosystems. Boeing didn't just buy bad parts, they created the monster that built them. Fast forward to 2011. American Airlines calls Boeing with a threat. We are about to buy hundreds of jets from Airbus because their new A320neo is more fuel efficient. Panic in Chicago. Boeing needs a countermove instantly. They don't have time to design a new plane. They have to patch the 737 again. They decide to strap massive, fuel-efficient engines onto the 1960s-era 737 frame. But there is a physics problem. The engines are too big. They have to mount them higher and further forward on the wing. This changes the centre of gravity. Under full thrust, the nose of the plane wants to pitch up. If it pitches up too much, the plane stalls and falls out of the sky. In the old days, the solution would be, this airframe is obsolete, build a new one. But the finance department said no, too expensive, too slow. So they came up with a software patch, MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. A few lines of code that would automatically push the nose down if it felt the plane pitching up. A digital band-aid over a mechanical flaw. Now here is the smoking gun. Why did they hide MCAS? Why didn't they tell the pilots? Money. Specifically, the type rating. Airlines love the 737 because if a pilot can fly an old one, they can fly a new one without expensive simulator training. Southwest Airlines even had a contract clause. If Boeing released a new 737 that required simulator training, Boeing would have to pay Southwest a penalty of $1 million per plane. That is $1 billion liability. So, Boeing executives had a financial mandate. The 737 MAX must handle exactly like the old one, and it must not require simulator training. If they told the FAA about MCAS, a new system that takes control of the plane, the FAA would mandate training. Boeing would owe Southwest billions. So they lied. They downplayed MCAS as a minor background code. They removed mentions of it from the pilot manuals. They convinced regulators it was harmless. They gambled that the software would never fail. They bet the entire company on a single sensor. October 29, 2018. Lion Air Flight 610. The single angle of attack sensor fails. It tells the MCAS computer the plane is stalling. It isn't. But the computer believes the sensor. It slams the nose down toward the Java Sea. The pilots fight back, pulling on the yoke. But they don't know MCAS exists. They are fighting a ghost. The computer wins. 189 dead. Boeing's response? They blamed the foreign pilots. They said the plane was safe. They didn't ground the fleet. They protected the stock price. Less than 5 months later, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. Same problem, same struggle. 157 dead. This time, the world didn't listen to Boeing. China grounded the plane first, then Europe, and finally, reluctantly, the US. But the damage was done. 346 people were dead because Boeing didn't want to pay Southwest Airlines a rebate. While this software was being written, what was Boeing doing with its cash? Were they spending it on safety redundancies? No. Between 2013 and 2019, Boeing spent over $40 billion on stock buybacks. Let me repeat that. $40 billion. They used company cash to buy their own shares from the open market to artificially inflate the stock price. This directly enriched the executives whose compensation was tied to that price. Imagine if that $40 billion had been spent on developing a proper replacement for the 737. Imagine if it had been spent on training. They had the money, they just chose to give it to Wall Street instead of the engineering department. When the MAX crisis hit and the stock tanked, that $40 billion had essentially been set on fire. It is one of the greatest misallocations of capital in corporate history. You would think, after the MAX crashes, after the global grounding, after the billions in fines, that Boeing would have found religion. They promised a safety turnaround. They fired the CEO. They brought in a new board. But then, January 5th, 2024, the Alaska Airlines door plug blows out. Investigations revealed the terrifying truth. The plane left the factory with 4 critical bolts missing. Not loose, missing. How does that happen? It happens when you create a production environment that is a pressure cooker. We learned that the fuselage arrived from Spirit Aerosystems with defects. Boeing workers had to open the door plug to fix rivets nearby. But in the chaos of schedule pressure, with managers screaming to get the plane out the door to meet quarterly targets, no one put the bolts back. And worse, there was no paper trail. The work wasn't even documented. The system of checks and balances had completely disintegrated. This introduces a concept called travelling work. In a healthy factory, you finish step A before you start step B. If the fuselage isn't perfect, you don't attach the wings. But at post-merger Boeing, stopping the line is a sin. So they normalised travelling work. This means pushing the plane to the next station, even if the previous tasks aren't done. We'll fix it later, they say. This creates chaos. You have mechanics trying to install wiring, while other teams are installing insulation over them. It breaks the chain of custody. It makes it impossible to track who did what. And it is done purely for financial optics, to show progress in the inventory system so they can recognise revenue earlier. The missing bolts on the Alaska jet were a direct result of this chaotic, finance-driven need to keep the line moving at all costs. This brings us back to John Barnett. He wasn't just a disgruntled employee, he was a quality manager. His job was to say, stop. But when he found metal shavings in the wiring bundles of the 787, shavings that could cause a short circuit and a fire, management didn't thank him. They isolated him. Barnett claimed that under pressure to meet delivery targets, managers were taking parts from the scrap bin, parts deemed defective, and installing them on new planes. He filed a whistleblower complaint. He fought them for years legally. In March 2024, he was in Charleston giving depositions. He was seemingly in good spirits, ready to finish his testimony. Then, he was found dead in his truck. The coroner ruled it suicide. But the timing, right in the middle of his testimony, sent a chill through every employee at Boeing. Whether it was suicide induced by years of harassment or something else, the message received by the workforce was clear. Fighting the company destroys you. If it was just Barnett, you could call it a tragedy. But then came Joshua Dean. Dean was a whistleblower at Spirit Aerosystems, the supplier Boeing spun off. He had warned about the exact kind of drilling defects that plagued the 737 MAX. 2 months after Barnett died, Joshua Dean, a healthy 45-year-old man known for his fitness, suddenly fell ill with a mysterious, fast-acting infection. Within 2 weeks, he was dead. 2 whistleblowers, same supply chain, same time frame, dead. Now, let's be careful. There is no evidence of foul play. But in the court of public opinion, and more importantly, inside the factories of Boeing and Spirit, the optics are devastating. Who is going to speak up about a loose bolt tomorrow? Who is going to risk their pension, their sanity, or their life to save a company that seems to hate them? The culture of silence is now cemented in fear. So, why isn't Boeing dead? If this were a car company, they'd be bankrupt. If this were a bank, they'd be nationalized. Why is the US government acting like a concerned parent rather than a prosecutor? Because Boeing isn't just a company. It is a geopolitical weapon. It is the United States' only major commercial aircraft manufacturer. It is one of the biggest defense contractors in the world. It builds the president's plane. It builds the nuclear missiles. It is the country's largest exporter. Washington looks at the global map and sees a duopoly. Boeing versus Airbus, Europe. If Boeing fails, Europe wins. Or worse, China's COMAC steps in to fill the void. The US government has calculated that it cannot afford to let Boeing fail, no matter how incompetent its management becomes. This creates a moral hazard. Boeing executives know they have a safety net. They know that no matter how many planes crash, Uncle Sam will bail them out to save the industrial base. This protection is codified in something called a Deferred Prosecution Agreement, DPA. After the 737 MAX crashes, the Department of Justice charged Boeing with conspiracy to defraud the United States. That is a felony. But instead of taking them to trial, the DOJ cut a deal. Boeing paid a fine, which was pocket change compared to their revenue, and promised to be good. No executives went to prison. The company wasn't forced to break up. The DPA is the legal manifestation of too big to jail. It sends a signal to the boardroom. You can kill 346 people, and the cost of doing business is just a fine and a few lawyers' fees. This destroys deterrence. If the penalty for cutting safety corners is less than the profit made from cutting those corners, a financialized management team will cut the corners every single time. It is simple math. The people who truly understand this betrayal are the families of the victims. They have been fighting for years to strip Boeing of its immunity. They sat in courtrooms listening to lawyers argue that the misconduct was the fault of 2 rogue test pilots, protecting the C-suite from liability. When the Alaska Airlines door blew out, the families of the MAX victims didn't see it as a new incident. They saw it as a violation of the plea deal. They are currently arguing that Boeing broke its promise to prioritize safety, and therefore the immunity should be revoked. They want criminal trials. They want executives in handcuffs. but they are fighting against the entire weight of the US military-industrial complex. The damage here goes beyond aviation. Boeing was the symbol of American industrial might. If it's not Boeing, I'm not going. That slogan meant something. It meant America builds the best things in the world. Now, travellers check their apps to make sure they aren't on a MAX. Airlines are publicly blasting Boeing's quality. And China is using this as propaganda to sell their C919 jet. The message to the global south is, America is in decline. Their planes fall apart. Buy Chinese. By allowing financiers to gut Boeing for short-term profit, the US has handed a massive strategic victory to its rivals. We traded national prestige for share buybacks. And the shareholders who took that money have already sold and moved on, leaving the American taxpayer and the American flying public holding the bag. So, where are we now? In 2024, under massive pressure, CEO Dave Calhoun announced he would step down. The board is being reshuffled. They are saying all the right things. We hear you. Safety first. But look closely at the replacements. Look at the incentives. Has the compensation structure changed? Are they still rewarded for stock price over quality metrics? Are they moving the headquarters back to Seattle to be with the engineers? Until the headquarters moves back to the factory floor, and until the CEO is an engineer who fears physics more than he fears Wall Street, nothing has actually changed. It's just a PR rotation. The ghost of Harry Stonecipher is still running the company. The deeper problem is that Boeing can't just snap back to 1990. They have lost a generation of institutional knowledge. The greybeards, the master engineers who knew intuitively where the stress points were, took early retirement packages during the cost-cutting waves. You cannot hire that experience back overnight. You cannot train a new workforce in a culture of fear. The supply chain, Spirit Aerosystems, and thousands of smaller shops has been squeezed so hard for so long that they have forgotten how to prioritise quality. Rebuilding Boeing isn't a quarterly project. It is a generational project. It requires accepting 10 years of lower profits to rebuild the foundation. And in modern American capitalism, no CEO survives 10 years of lower profits. The market demands the drug of immediate returns. This is the impasse. The cure for Boeing is poison for its stock price. This leaves you, the passenger, in a strange position. You are the involuntary beta tester for a company trying to find its way back to competence. Every time you board a plane, you are putting your trust in a system that has repeatedly proven it will gamble with your life to save a percentage point on a margin sheet. And you don't have a choice. It's a duopoly. You can't boycott Boeing unless you stop flying. You are a captive customer of a monopoly that has lost its mind. But if you think this story ends with Boeing, you are missing the point. Boeing is not an anomaly. It is the canary in the coal mine. Look at Intel. Look at General Electric. Look at US Steel. The same virus that infected Boeing, the virus of financialization, of prioritizing the trading of assets over the creation of value, is present in almost every major American industry. We have replaced Edison and Ford with hedge fund managers and consultants. The door plug blowing out over Portland was a warning shot, not just for aviation, but for the entire economy. It was the sound of the real world, the world of bolts, metal, and physics, finally snapping back against the spreadsheet world. When we stop building things that work and start building financial instruments that look like things, eventually, gravity calls our bluff. Boeing is just the first giant to stumble. But as the infrastructure of the West ages, and as the efficiency experts continue to hollow out our hospitals, our power grids, and our supply chains, the next blowout won't be at 16,000 feet. it will be on the ground. And it will be much, much more expensive. This is the Capital curriculum. The lesson is simple. Physics doesn't negotiate with shareholders. Make sure you are subscribed for the next investigation.